Hi, it's me again, Ray, with another podcast episode. This one, all about the house in the woods. Now you might think, what's that, the house in the woods? What's that got to do with anything from the 50s and 60s? Well, when I was a kid, where we lived, a lot of the land around us, well, there was farmland, woodland, fields, wasteland. There was just land. There wasn't all the concrete jungle that there is now. It's all gone, sadly. All the woodland's gone. You could go over to the woods. There were ponds, little streams, things to explore, trees to climb. It was fantastic. In fact, in the school summer holidays, I was over there every day, looking for birds' nests, not pinching the eggs, I'll have you know, but just looking for birds' nests, climbing trees, just generally messing about, which is what kids did in those days in the woods. There was a farm there, and the farmer, he didn't seem to mind us, as long as we kept out of his cornfield, didn't trample the corn to bits and pull down fences and leave gates open. He was fine. Now, I used to go over there and get sticklebacks and tadpoles from this pond, and one of the kids at school had said if you go further into the woods there's another bigger pond. So I thought, well, I'll go and have a look at this. So one day I wandered over to the woods. Instead of taking my usual route onto the farm track, get so far into the woods then out onto the farm track, I carried on deeper and deeper into the woods. I couldn't see this pond anywhere. There wasn't a pond, but what there was a house. This house in the woods. I sort of looked through the bushes and the trees. I didn't go right up to it. It was a very old house, like flint walls with a thatched roof. Anyway, as I gingerly walked further towards it, got closer and closer, the front door was open. There was a kind of old wooden porch bit over the front door, very old windows, ivy all growing up the walls. Very old house. It was lovely. And the garden wasn't a garden like I knew it. It wasn't flowers. It was all vegetables and fruit. There was gooseberry bushes. I remember gooseberry bushes, black currants. There were a couple of apple trees. I think there was a pear tree. So I remember looking at the pears and wondering whether I could go and nick one, which I didn't, because as the door was open, I thought, well, whoever lives there is obviously in. So anyway, I carried on past the house. I didn't take too much notice because I wanted to find the pond. The woods seemed to go on for miles, so I eventually did a sort of right turn and cut out onto the farm track that I knew. I thought the kid at school must have just been messing about. Either that or it was so much further into the woods. I would have ended up in a village which was miles away from where I lived, because the woodland did just go on and on. A couple of days later I was back over there and I thought I'd go past the house again. I don't know why, I was intrigued. It just seemed an odd place for the house, right in the middle of the woods. There was a little track, the one I'd followed, but there was no way you could park a car there. There was no roadway. There was nothing. As I approached the house, I saw a girl in the garden, standing next to the vegetable plot. There was also a boy. She was about, my age, I don't know, 11, 12, something like that. The boy was younger, probably 7 or 8 years old. He was digging out all the weeds between the rows of, I don't know what they were, potatoes or vegetables, whatever they were. He was digging out all the weeds, and he had this sort of hoe type thing, and he was working away. And the girl, she was just standing there watching him. I got a little bit closer because I thought I'd go and say hello. There was a gate, a wooden gate. I didn't go through the gate. But as I reached the gate, she looked up and she saw me and she wandered over towards me. And I said hi, and she said her name was Amy. And she said to me, "You look funny." And I didn't take much notice of that. There were girls. I wasn't interested in girls at that age. They just said silly things as far as I was concerned. So saying I looked funny was just something silly. We talked a little bit. She was a little bit cagey. I think she was shy, not cagey. I asked her what school she went to, and she just looked at me and frowned with this bemused look. I didn't remember ever seeing her at my school, and I think I would have noticed because she said I looked funny, but she was in a long white dress. Well, I say white, it was dirty, which reached the ground. A very long sort of, frock they called them in those days. And she was quite dirty. Her hands were grubby and her face was grubby. This frock thing she was wearing was quite dirty. And I must admit my immediate thought was, what sort of mum has she got to let her come out like that? Unless she'd just been playing in the garden and the vegetable bit, or helping what I assumed that the boy was her brother. I wasn't sure, but her hair was all kind of rat tails as well. It hadn't been at all looked after. It certainly hadn't been washed or brushed for quite a long time. She looked down at my shoes and she said, "Your boots are funny." And again, I just thought, oh, silly girl, they're all silly at that age. As far as I was concerned, they were silly at any age. So I eventually wandered off and wandered along the farm track. And I saw the farmer's son. I knew he was a farmer's son. I bumped into him several times in the past. He was repairing an electric fence and he told me all about it. He said there's a car battery on the ground there, and he was telling me how the fence worked. Not to touch the wire because I'd get an electric shock. I was into that sort of thing. I liked anything electrical. So I was quite interested when he told me how it worked. I didn't mention the house in the woods because I just forgot about it, I suppose. Didn't seem relevant, and I forgot about it. Next time I passed the house, the girl was in the front garden again. The boy wasn't there. This time she was doing some weeding with this hoe, sort of hoeing the ground and getting mud all up her white frock. She still had this frock on, and it didn't look as if she'd changed at all. Her hair was still long and greasy and rat-taily, and her face was grubby, and I wondered whether she ever washed. It all seemed a bit odd to me. She came over and said hello. I was asking her about school again, and she said, I work. And I thought, work? I said, yes, but you go to school. And she said, I work. I didn't know what she was talking about, work at that age. I didn't go to work, I went to school. I said, well, where do you work? This time I was frowning at her, and she said, here, on the land. I didn't take much notice of her, to be honest. I thought perhaps she was a little touched in the head. I wandered off again and out onto the farm track. The farmer's son wasn't there, so I just went and played around, climbed in the haystack, which I often did. I used to like the haystack in the summer. Bumped into a few friends of mine and spent the rest of the day with them. Didn't mention the house to them. I don't know why. I wanted it to be my secret. It seemed that no one knew about the house other than me. So I rather liked that idea. I didn't want all my friends going there. Maybe I didn't want them to meet the girl. I must admit, I rather liked her. Even though I wasn't interested in girls, of course, they were all silly, but I did rather like her. I think, yes, she intrigued me. There was something mysterious about her, and I didn't want to share her with my friends. The next time I saw her, we barely got chatting. I wanted to find out more about her. All I knew was that her name was Amy, and she worked on the vegetable plot and lived in the house. I didn't know anything else about her. So we got chatting again. I was about to ask her a few questions when this woman, old woman, I say old woman, she was old to me, she appeared in the front door and called out, "Amy, get in here." So Amy went scurrying off like she was in trouble. I don't know what that was about. And that was it. So I wandered on, found the farmer's son again. He was on a tractor this time, tinkering around with a tractor. So I went and chatted to him. They were good days, you're just wandering around in the sunshine. No rat race, nothing to worry about. Well, I suppose being 12 years old, there was nothing to worry about. Just enjoying the summer holiday away from school. It was fantastic. I loved mechanical things. He was tinkering with the tractor and I went and had a look. While he was showing me around the engine, he just said, "What have you been up to?" And I said to him, "I've just been to that house in the woods." I said, "I pass that sometimes." The spanner he had in his hand, he'd been tightening up a nut. He dropped it and sort of turned and looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. And he said, "What house?" I said, "The house in the woods." I pointed back into the woodland. And he said, "There's no house in the woods." And I said, "Well, there is." He just picked up his spanner and walked off. I don't know where he went. I thought I'd upset him in some way. I don't know what I'd done. But he obviously didn't want to talk to me anymore. He just walked off. The next time I walked through the woods, I wanted to see Amy again. I followed the track to where the house had been. I say had been because it had gone. There was no house there. And I looked around. This was the place, definitely the place. But it had gone. I even traced my steps back and then took the path again to where the house had been. No house. At that stage I thought I must have been dreaming, but it had seemed so real. I'd spoken to the girl, I'd seen the boy in the garden, I'd seen the woman at the door. It had been real, but now the house had disappeared. And seeing as the lad on the tractor had said to me there's no house in the woods, I really did wonder whether I'd been dreaming. I made my way out of the woods onto the farm track and saw the lad, the farmer's son, by a haystack. There were several haystacks in various fields. It was a huge farm, actually. It's all concrete now, all houses and bungalows and dreadful. There we are. And I went over and I wondered whether he was speaking to me. So I said hello and he said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And he was fine, as if nothing had happened the last time I'd met him. And he said, "Where have you been? Which way did you come here?" And I said, "Through the woods." And he looked at me and he frowned and he said, "You're not going to tell me there's a house in the woods again, are you?" And I just said, "No, it's gone." And he laughed. He said, "It's gone?" He said, "Well, there either is a house in the woods or there isn't." And I said, "No, there isn't." He said, "You were mistaken all along." I said, "Yeah, must have been dreaming." He seemed a bit odd. He was trying to make light of it, but I could see in his eyes that he was worried. He said he had to carry on. He had to go and get the tractor. So I said, "Okay, see you later." He began to walk away and then he stopped and turned and he said, "Keep out of them woods," was the way he put it. "Keep out of them woods. There's danger there." And I just nodded and said, "Okay." And he walked off. Now, of course, that intrigued me. There's danger there. I knew he was hiding something. He knew something about the house, which just made me want to investigate even more. I was more intrigued than ever, so I went back into the woods, looking for the house. I couldn't find it. It wasn't there. I was thinking I must have taken the wrong path. I knew I hadn't been dreaming. The dream was so vivid, I remember it. There was no way I'd been dreaming. I spent a couple of hours or more searching the woods. I could not find the house. Eventually gave up, went home, and that was that. The following day I went back into the woods. The house was there. No sign of Amy or the boy, but the house was there. I stood at the gate, staring at it. I definitely hadn't got the wrong place. This was where the house had always been, but it had disappeared, and now it was back again. And I must admit, I did feel very scared, felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I looked at the place, and I did begin to wonder. There's danger there. What did he mean? Then Amy came out of the door and trotted over towards me looking quite happy. And she said, "You are funny." And I said, "Why am I funny?" She said, "You look worried. Why are you worried?" And I said, "Because there's something strange about you and your house." She just giggled and said, "Oh, don't be so silly." So I said to her, "Come to my house. My mum makes lovely jam sandwiches," which she did. She made lovely jam sandwiches, my favourite. I said, come to my house. Come and have jam sandwiches." And she said no. She seemed very hesitant, very reluctant. No. I took her hand, said, "Come on." And I started to walk. The gate had been open. I started to walk her along the path. Her hand was like ice. It was freezing cold. I said to her, "You are freezing. Why are you so cold?" She said, "I'm not cold." And I said, "Well, your hand is like a block of ice." I said, "It's a hot summer day." I said, "Aren't you hot?" She said, "I'm fine." But her hand was freezing cold. I took her down the path, gripping her hand, for about, I don't know how far, 20 yards, just out of sight of the house, with the bushes and the trees. And she stopped. She said, "I can't go any further." I said, "Oh, come and have a jam sandwich at my house and some orange juice." "No," she said, "I can't go any further." She yanked her hand out of mine, and she just stood there looking at me, arms by her sides, her long black hair in rat tails. She looked worried, her grubby face, her dark eyes, her eyes were almost black, and she just looked worried. And I said, "Come on, Amy, come to my house." And she turned and ran back to her house. So I thought, well, I don't know, I might as well give up with her. She definitely is touched in the head. I wandered back along the path, only 20 yards or so. Her house had gone. It just wasn't there, and I knew I was in the right place. It had gone. That's when I realised that Amy was a ghost. She must have been a ghost. There was no other explanation. At that age, obviously I heard about ghosts. Everyone said, "Oh, there's no such thing as ghosts. Don't be silly, there's no ghosts. It's all stories and films and books. No ghosts in real life." But she was a ghost. Amy was a ghost. There was no other explanation. I wandered out of the woods and I saw my old mate, the farmhand, Jack his name, by the way, and he said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." And I said, "I have, Jack, I've seen a ghost in there." And he said, "I wish you'd stop going on about that house and Amy." And I said, "How do you know the name? I've never mentioned the name Amy to you." And he looked shocked. He said, "Oh, you have? You mentioned it before." I said, "No, I've never mentioned Amy." And he said, "Oh, well, I don't know anything." And he started to walk off, and I ran after him. And I said, come on, what's going on?" And he said, "All right, okay, but promise me you'll never go into the woods again if I tell you." And I said, "Yeah, okay, I promise." Fingers crossed, because I was going to go back in the woods. He said, "This farm has been in my family for generations, going way, way back. My dad, grandfather, great-grandfather, blah, 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 all this, going back generations. There was a house in the woods, and it burnt down." And I said, "Well, how come I keep seeing it? And how come this Amy and her brother and this woman in the doorway?" And I told him everything I'd seen. He said, "Well, they're ghosts, aren't they?" And I said, "Yes." I laughed a bit at the time. I said, "Yes, but how come the house is there and then it isn't?" And he said, I don't know any more than that." He said, "I suggest you forget all about it." And I knew I couldn't forget all about it. He eventually went off. I went back into the woods, dangerous though he'd said it was. I was just intrigued. The house wasn't there. And I never saw that house again. The times, it must have been 100 times over the school summer holidays, I went back to that place. The house had gone forever. And now it's a housing estate now. The whole lot. Concrete jungle, housing estate. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Not a usual type of episode, but it is going back to the 50s and early 60s and what happened in those days. So there's something a little bit different that happened. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye for now.